Thanks, guys, for being here. So I'd like to know a little bit more about who each of you are. So in seating order, in about 60 seconds, can you give us a little bit of information about yourself and the work that you do? Starting over here.
Yeah, hi, I'm David Shayer. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Vantage in the UK, our head office in Sydney, Australia, and I head up the UK operation. We're a retail FX broker, and we also do 300 plus instruments, so not just FX, but many other products, and we're looking to expand our institutional offering as well.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear us okay. I'm Parveen Dhanda, Ecosystem Director at Innovate Finance. So Innovate Finance is a trade body. We represent over 260 members from institutes, the banks, but predominantly our membership consists of fintechs.
Thank you so much.
Oh, hi. Thanks for inviting us. Gregory Armon-Jones. I run a headhunting company based in London. I've been an FX and macro headhunter for about 16, 17 years, mainly focused within FX macro, both on the buy side and the sell side, and now working with more fintech and broking companies as well.
Thank you, Greg.
I'm Barney Reynolds. I'm a partner at Shearman Sterling, a global law firm, and I advise on financial regulatory matters, particularly in the UK, EU, but also more globally, institutions of different sizes and fintechs of different stages of development.
Thank you all. So my first question for everybody is a bit of a lightning round. So I'd like all of you to answer this question. Thinking about London, post-Brexit, post-COVID, what are the things that you have noticed about your business's operations, day-to-day things that have changed the most in the past 12 months? Who wants to go first? Who's brave? Yes, go for it.
I mean, Brexit, I was still very optimistic. There's a future after Brexit, but it has been a big impact with passporting. Financial services were just sort of left off the deal with the EU, and so we've just almost been forgotten about. The equivalence has been talked about a lot, and nothing's really materialized on the equivalence. It's also very hard to hire people. We had a great talent pool there with the EU, and now it's much more difficult to hire. And obviously, some jobs have moved outside the UK to EU places. Amsterdam's picked up business, France, Frankfurt. But I still am optimistic about the UK. But there's a lot of still uncertainty that has to be sorted out with government.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to speak on behalf of our members, and as I mentioned before, most of our members are fintechs, and echoing your point as well, I think even before Brexit, actually, talent was always a key challenge for these fintech companies, but also, post-Brexit, it's also very costly for some of these companies now to have licenses in Europe as well. So that's a challenge. And then also just in terms of the data and, what does that mean in a sort of post-Brexit world. But I think also we should be talking Brexit in relation to COVID as well, because that's either been like a distractor in terms of what's happening with Brexit or a disguise almost as well. So, everything that's going on in the world has, changed things significantly.
Absolutely. Greg, what are your thoughts on this?
Look, Brexit was a real pain for a lot of, mainly banks, because if you're a bank and you've got your Italian sales guy, one of my clients is around the corner, and you have the whole sales team, Italian, Iberian, Nordics, they're all on the same pod, they're all together, so they're able to communicate together and they're able to share information and see what's happening in the market. Suddenly, right, you've got to go to Milan or you've got to go to Frankfurt, and each bank have their different centers. So Bank of America is in Paris. So suddenly you've got to be, if you're Bank of America, you've got to find an Italian salesperson that's happy to be based in Paris. And it just created a real nightmare for relocating people, but at the same time, finding talent. This actually was a great opportunity, I think, for a lot of fintechs, and it's really interesting to see how a lot of the fintechs or even broker firms, jumped on that, because there suddenly became a talent pool where, I'm an Italian person, and I've lived in London for the last 15 years, and my kids, I don't want to go to Milan, or I don't want to go to Madrid. And so it meant that I got one of my team to have a look at a lot of the top 50 fintech firms, okay? And the percentage of fintechs that have hired people from banks, okay? And a lot of them, maybe if they're more payment focused or trading focused, is high. And so it's been a great opportunity for fintechs to hire talent that they wouldn't normally be able to get.
Right. Barney, what are your thoughts on this?
So in the legal community, I mean, certainly what I see, there's been no effect of Brexit materially. I mean, the COVID has obviously led to working from home to some degree. We'll have to see how that pans out. In terms of the post-Brexit position of the UK, I mean, financial centres are centres for a reason, and we've had only 4 over the last 400 years. Antwerp and Amsterdam were destroyed by war. Brexit is an event, but it's not a war, and it's not going to affect, in my view, London's dominance. I think what we need to do is move quickly, though, to adjust to a new business model. I think fintech, in fact, is part of the answer. Some of the more antiquated ways of delivering services are going to have to change. It requires a bit of legal ingenuity to repiece things back together. But, you know, the reason it's a centre is the customers come for the best liquidity and pricing and talent and so on, and nothing's changed. So, yes, there have been a few moves, but in the scheme of things, if you look at the stats, it's nothing particularly significant. And in fact, if we reboot the system and get the magnet working even better, I think London has got an immense amount to offer, which we've only just begun to tap into.
No, I agree. The other thing as well is everyone was going, oh, well, you know, Frankfurt's going to be the new, you know, big centre. Frankfurt, I mean, one of my friends was over from Frankfurt just this week. It's an eighth of the size of London, okay? You suddenly go, I think it was one of the banks reserved, I think it was actually Deutsche Bank, reserved all the private school places that they could because there was a limited number. And so, you know, London has, you know, taken a bit of a knock. It's definitely lost a percentage of the real talent that was there. But it's going to come back. You don't have to look around the amount of buildings that are still being built. I think you'd probably know better the number of European fintech firms. I think in the top 50, I think still 25 are based in London. Is that right? Does that sound right? Actually, I know it's right. I got one of my guys to research it. I think it is about that.
Yeah, I think there's been 20 unicorns created this year. You know, the UK has got 105 unicorns. You know, Revolut's worth 23 billion. We've got Revolut, we've got Monzo. You know, UK is in a great position to build on fintech. You know, the other countries are quite, you know, jealous of, you know, the UK's fintech. I think the UK, though, needs to spread it out, not just from around Shoreditch, Old Street, and these areas. It needs to spread it around the UK. You know, we have Level 39 in Canary Wharf, we have Barclays Rise, but it's very London dominated. You know, the UK's got great talent, great education. We need to spread it around the UK and make fintech a great opportunity to get out of Brexit, to get out of COVID, and fintech could be a great solution, you know, for the UK.
Perhaps I could just add, I mean, when people are buying financial services and products, it's a trust-based sale, ultimately, because you want repeat business, and it's a virtual product intrinsically, ultimately. I mean, no, you can't put your hands on it. And so it depends on the people, the organisation, the systems that you're buying it from. And underpinning that trust-based system is something we have that's unique in my view, which is the fully functioning common law democratic system that we have. And in fact, we've sacrificed competitiveness over the last years before Brexit, nothing to do with Brexit, by being subsumed into a codified civil law system, which basically emanates from the Franco-German methods of the 19th century, where you make rules for everything in advance and then try and have an automated way, like code. You code the law, but it doesn't work. It's failed for services and it fails for financial services. And so, as I see it, we're in first gear. We need to get back to our methods, which are predictable, where the law evolves, but it underpins a system of trust dating back to Lloyd's of London and before. And that is really the killer app of the city. And that's what we need to concentrate on and not worry about other rules being made by other people, because the business goes where the business is most profitable, the prices are best, where you get the best profit, and then all people follow.
So if we're thinking about regulation and how perhaps the style or the sort of the method of regulating has been to do it all in advance and sort of see, okay, we think that this is going to happen, so this is our proactive response to that. What is that at the moment in London? What are these regulations that the government has prepared post-Brexit to prepare for this new era of finance and financial technology? David, I'll direct this to you initially.
Well, I think a lot of the regulation currently in the UK has come from Europe. It's come from ESMA, and so the UK is quite tied by that still at the moment. For us in retail FX broker, then we're tied into 30-to-1 leverage, and it's a lot of it's come from ESMA EU rules. So whether or not the UK post-Brexit will be more free and be more like a Singapore, Hong Kong in terms of regulation, the jury's still out on that, because I think it's going to be difficult for the FCA to say, not break away from, the EU rules. I think they're probably here to stay. I mean, for us, just in my world, even if we were to move to 100-to-1 leverage, that would make a big difference, because the regulations have been brought in to try and protect people, but in actual fact, they're protecting people less, because people are just going offshore and they're opening up accounts in Bermuda, Cayman, and not with the UK. So London needs to be more, I hope, more free with regulation and more like a Singapore or Hong Kong.
So I think you need to disentangle a number of moving parts here, because it's a very complicated picture. I don't think London's going to be like Singapore and Hong Kong. I think it's, funnily enough, once we do it properly, it's much more attractive. But we need to get from here, we need to optimize the system we've got. It's different for a whole host of reasons. They're much smaller ecosystems, and they're more top-down, albeit with the common law method. Whereas here, with our democratic systems and so on, it's much more, the businesses are much more empowered. So the inherited EU code runs to millions of provisions. I mean, 1.7 million provisions of MiFID II. This is too complicated for proper risk management. So a lot of that blanket needs to be lifted off, and the Treasury are consulting on giving the rules to the regulators so that they can start refining them for the UK market. The thing that I think we really need to watch out, I mean, that has started to happen. In my view, we could be going a lot more quickly, and that's partly because of a sort of collective funk that we've been through over the last 5 years. But we're coming out of that. People are starting to look forward and start to think, emerge into the sunlight. So that blanket lifting process needs to accelerate and carry on. But the other thing is the behavior of the regulators, because within the EU system, the regulators are applying this code, so they're basically judges of fact as to whether a code provision is breached. They're going to be given much more power. And with that, there need to be checks and balances. First of all, parliamentary oversight, but actually, even more importantly, the courts. And the courts, so they need to be required to act predictably and clearly in accordance with their own rules. And if they've forgotten to make a rule, tough, they've got to go and make another one. But they can't have this generic stuff where, look, I'll tell you what it is afterwards, that we sort of got used to. And I think the consumer duty is in danger of becoming a sort of thing like that. So I think if we get it right, and it is work, it's hard work, but we've got the people to do it, we can move very, very quickly. It's naturally embedded in the system, but we've got to revitalize it.
Right, so, I mean, do you think that, I mean, maybe you kind of already answered this question, but I just want to clarify. Do you think that the UK and London in particular has the regulatory faculties to quickly adapt to whatever is coming next?
Certainly, and the more people that get into making it happen, the quicker it'll happen. But I mean, economically and financially, the impact is clear, and there's now a lot of research on this. I mean, Hayek actually had a proposition that the common law leads to more liberty, individual and so on, and then business liberty. But the research in the States from about 1989 onwards and so on demonstrates that it leads to vastly superior economic performance. And it's because of the ability of the common law to evolve and remain predictable at the same time. It's the genius of the system. But it requires lots of very smart people. And we've got those people. But obviously, the more people engaged with this, the faster we can go.
I think also you should look at, from a regulation point of view of open banking as well. So I was on a conference, on a panel last week on open banking and open finance as well. And if you look at what the FCA have done in terms of all the sandboxes, to make sure that the larger banks, the institutions are working with the fintechs as well. So, certain conditions have been in place for a while to grow, specifically fintechs in the UK. But I think, it's there was, a review by the Khalifa Review as well. It needs to be seamless, in terms of regulation. And we don't want regulation to also then... I think the challenge when a market's too regulated is the challenge of innovation as well. So it's getting that balance right.
Yeah, I mean, I think the government still has a lot to do, in terms of nurturing the fintech talent. If you look at all the listings for fintechs, predominantly they're still in New York or the US. They need to help firms to do listings here to make them, when they want to get access to capital, and to nurture the shares of the owners so they don't get diluted, and so that they still have control of the fintech. I think the government can do a lot on helping businesses with listings. But I think the UK is still a great place to do business. The rule of law here is excellent. It's easy to set up a company, and there's lots of talent here.
And that ties in with your crypto thing you were saying earlier. I mean, we're being slow, perhaps, as other developed countries are on crypto. I mean, people are being cautious on it. Obviously, it could go very wrong. But we need to get out in front, decide what we're doing and do it quickly, and put the backing of the trusted system behind it if we're going to accept it, or if we don't want it, fine. We need to decide that and move quickly. But the bigger point, actually, in my view, that would jump over whether you need open banking at all, would jump over crypto, is basically to develop ways in which you can repackage global securities into a form you can just trade within the UK legal and regulatory ecosystem. And then, basically, you don't have to tangle with anyone's foreign laws. And the reverse solicitation rules and everything else will allow people from all over the world, retail and consumer, to use their iPhones or smart devices to access our products and benefit from that. And the products and the performance will speak for themselves. Whether that includes some of the current crypto products or not, I don't know. But that's where we should be heading. We shouldn't get tied down with too many specifics along the way of the here and now. Okay, well, this person's doing this. Do we want to support that? I think we need to be thinking big.
I mean, on the crypto, I think that the crypto really needs to be pushed out more to the mainstream, until once it's in the mainstream and you can start using it and start buying things, and I think it's going to become much more acceptable. I'm a big fan of open banking. I mean, we've developed QR code payments. I mean, and we're using that for clients to deposit money. They can deposit money in 5 seconds using a QR code payment. My cleaner is even using QR code payments with Anna Money, and is able to send me an invoice as soon as they go out the door. QR code payment, deposit in 5 seconds. So I mean, that could be the phasing out of credit cards. Because credit cards, you lose them, you've got to type in your details all the time, they get reissued. So I'm a big fan of open banking, but crypto, really needs to start coming in more into the mainstream, so you can start, using it for real things.
Right. So thinking, if I'm a crypto company, or another fintech company that's really on sort of the bleeding edge of what's happening right now in terms of financial technology, why would I pick London? What would you say is the number one reason? What's the number one value proposition for starting and scaling a business here? Greg, if you want to take this.
It's the obvious talent pool of people to get from. I mean, depending on... First of all, you have a problem if we talk about crypto. A lot of the people who are experts in crypto are people, being blunt, a lot of people bought crypto really early on, who they suddenly made a load of money out of crypto, and they are the experts in crypto. Well done for buying it low, and it's now worth up here. Someone else mentioned it earlier. You've even got people who are, cleaners talking about, well, I'm going to buy some, crypto. People who never know anything about it, and you're kind of like, right, that's when you know there's a problem. Crypto is something we're going to have to embrace. But the problem is, I had one hedge fund say, right, we need someone who can be a risk manager with crypto. You kind of go, well, that job didn't exist like 5 years ago. And so you've then got to go for a lot of these, crypto companies, crypto funds or brokers. They've got to find people that or new jobs that didn't exist. So what cryptocurrency, a lot of people look at it and go, doesn't really trade like foreign exchange. It actually trades more like commodities. So right, we've got to find all the banks that were shutting commodity desks 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We need to find those risk managers or those traders that might be interested in coming back in. So look, London is an obvious hub for people to find talent. But also, and this is where we sometimes speak to a lot of firms, who you initially hire to be part of your team, you suddenly then go, well, actually, we can upgrade our talent because people that wouldn't ever consider us working for us, because they work at an investment bank and they want to work for a tier 1 or 2 tier bank, will now consider going to a fintech company or will consider going to a startup because they can see the potential upside.
But, I think at the moment crypto is very speculative. People are just speculating on cryptocurrency, and there are other things coming out, like asset-backed cryptos. So you'll get exchanges like Archax where you'll create coins on say, like for example, the Shard, and you will buy coins in the Shard. So you'll be trading crypto on an exchange as if you're trading stocks and shares. So there's things like that, coming down the line rather than just the speculation on Bitcoin or crypto that people know of, and it's just currency, and they never crystallize it. But I think the UK, I think we underestimate the UK. People like living here, they like working here. The families are established here. The education's good. And when the Brexit did happen, you could see a lot of people. You've got to get the talent to move. And if the talent's not moving, then the UK's still got a lot of potential because not everyone, people like it here.
I would say it's the legal system ultimately, because and the regulatory system backs off that. But on the regulatory side, we're being cautious. I don't think that's it's just a question of judgment, but I think it's not necessarily wrong what we're doing. On the law, which is more fundamental, do you get what you paid for? We have a system that will sort that out predictably and fairly. And that you can't say that all over the world. And people just assume this out of the equation because the ITs run ahead of all these legal systems. And all I can say is just wait till people start not getting what they thought they've got around the world in various systems. I think you'll find people that the London business is only going to increase. I mean, that phenomenon, which people don't seem to factor into their analysis, seems to be more valuable than anything else. Because if you don't get what you paid for, it doesn't matter how talented your people are, or where they're sitting, or whether they've got a nice lifestyle, or whether their kids go to the right school in the environment you're in. You haven't, your customers are annoyed.
So I think it's actually a combination of a lot of things. It's not just one particular thing. But I mean, even if you look at investment in fintech, just this year alone, we reported it was $5.7 billion of investment went into fintech companies, which is an increase of 34% of last year, and that's in a post-Brexit. Yes, we're still in the pandemic world, right? But also, if you look at fintech, the ecosystem just generally of digital tech in the UK, fintech has grown. Definitely take your point in terms of dual shares and structures and so forth. And yes, there's a lot more we can do, even from the talent side, and especially in a post-Brexit with visas, and obviously with the Khalifa report, they suggested now scale-up a visa, which is great. But all the conditions are very much here, and for me, it's not just about London; it's about the UK as a whole. We have phenomenal financial hubs, ecosystem hubs around the UK. Particularly in Scotland as well. So, the conditions are here, and I think we're at the forefront of that if you compare us to the rest of the globe.
Yeah, I mean, it's one unfortunate thing actually of Brexit is the potential breakup of the UK. That's what I'm disappointed in, coming from Scotland, is that I think. People probably think, Scotland is not very important, it's very small, but I think it could have big implications, on the pressure on the pound. If the Scotland decides, if it can get into the EU, what will happen to jobs then? Will people start moving up to Edinburgh to get access to Europe? Will the euro come onto the mainland through the back door? And then we've got potential problems with the euro onto the UK mainland. So I think the Scottish question, people probably put it to the back burner, or it's just Scotland, but I think it's one to watch, what's going to go on up there.
Absolutely. So kind of, we've talked around this a little bit, but I want to ask the question a little bit more directly, which is, what have you seen in terms of feet on the ground? How has Brexit, especially in the context of COVID, affected the way that people are coming? What are the challenges in attracting talent in this world that we have today? Parveen, I'll put this to you first.
Well, yeah, we have touched on talent and skills. And like I mentioned right at the beginning, even pre-COVID, it was a huge challenge for, these scaling companies. They're scaling around 300% year on year. So my previous role was at Tech Nation. I was supporting over 300 companies from early stage to just before they exited. And because of the pace that they're, trying to recruit, they need it to be easy for them. And I think their real concerns was with Brexit, right? And yes, visas do help, but we need to make it seamless, in order to get a visa. But also, it's not just about getting the visa. It's also, if people are moving and they're moving their families, they need to have some sort of, be able to know that they can stay in the country. How long is that visa from? So that's that perspective. The other perspective is, what are we doing as a country to make sure that we are supporting, talent here in the UK? Just generally in the tech space, we talk a lot about, digital talent, having more females in tech as well. So it's also that diversity of talent, and it's also to ensure that the fintech space and financial services as a whole is more inclusive as well. So, a number of measures need to be taken in place. I think what's interesting with COVID is what's going to happen next, because a lot of organizations and companies are talking about remote working. And so that, again, can bring an opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. But also, it's going to be really interesting to see how the next 6 months go, because a lot of institutions, I don't know what it's been like on the law side, but a lot of people have been working from home, and a lot of people love working from home because of, the work-life balance, not having to do it. Christ, I look at my team and they love working from home because, it saves them having to go on the district line for 45 minutes in the morning. But as an employer, and if you're a fintech company or if you're, running your own business, the best way for you to train your staff is when they're with you, or they can hear you or see meetings, or they can learn from their colleagues. And you can't always do that. In the banking world, some banks have been more strict than others where who comes into the office or not. I mean, it was a complete lockdown. And what we noticed with that was the number of people who actually moved jobs dropped. Okay, so the turnover in staff dropped, because everyone was just trying to keep their head down, and we want to make sure we get out of this, because we didn't know what we were going to come out of with the pandemic. Do we still have a financial system? Do we still have a world going? So what we're seeing now is, as people are coming back, those people that were thinking about moving now are moving, and so there's definitely a spike in people hiring or people making that jump. And I suppose with a lot of these fintech firms, because the bank's saying, look, you do have to come back to the office, you've got an advantage. If you can remote, before the advantage with if you work for a fintech company or even a broker is, look, you can get paid cash, you're not being paid by a deferred bonus, and you might even get share options, okay, which is all as a great little bit. If you can then add, and we don't mind if 3 days out of 2 you can work from home, that's going to be an added benefit for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I still hope with the pre-Brexit, I think some companies were being a bit lazy with their hiring. It was too easy to hire someone with an EU passport, and if you're looking at a candidate, it was much easier to hire the person with an EU passport. So I'm still optimistic, and I hope post-Brexit that I want the best talent, wherever you're from. I don't care where you're from, Turkey, Brazil, China, Japan. I want the UK to be able to hire talent into the UK from wherever you are. That's what we need to get to, and make visas easy to get, and to get that talent in, rather than just making people pre-Brexit were just a bit too lazy, just hiring someone with an EU passport.
I think the other thing that is going to have to happen, and it's going to involve a lot of thinking. I mean, it's already happening, but a lot of thinking and research on the law is allowing people to take long weekends and work from other places. So people who combine their work, a sort of vacation work blends, where you go for a little bit longer and you do a bit of work out there as well and zoom into things. I see that happening, and I mean, I'm sure we all have. And in fact, instances of people living entirely in a different country and zooming in. But nailing that down on the tax front and getting the analytics right around that is important. But I think, at least in some places in the world, it's going to be possible to do that, and I think it's going to be very attractive for people.
One question I've got is, when we talk about fintech, and it's a very broad term, but again, we were looking at some data on what kind of people are fintech people employing, and I think the majority is still, people with an IT background or coding. I mean, it's very much very heavy within that, and that is I think, still quite a competitive area. I mean, I don't do tech recruitment. It's something I've shied away from, and actually will never want to do tech recruitment. But it just doesn't appeal. But I think it's obviously going to be very profitable. But you're then competing against Amazon, Google, everyone, right? And so, and I think the thing that motivates someone to do a tech job is very different from someone who might be at a bank in a sales role or a banking role. And so how the fintech firms evolve, because when I look across them now, there are more sales, there are more people who used to be at banks running relationships, making that step across as these companies grow. So it will be interesting to see how fintech firms develop with who they need to hire, because there's only a certain number of developers you need until you need to then sell that product or have operations that run it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think not just for fintechs, but just tech companies in general. It's that development piece. Just from a global perspective, you're competing. Yes, you're right, with the Googles and the Amazons, but also with government, with larger banks, institutions as well. I think where they also fintechs really focus on is on culture. Right, because you mentioned before, that you've noticed that a lot of companies are moving from, the banks to these fintech scaling businesses as well, and where their competitive advantage tends to be is on that culture, and to be part of something that is growing, innovating, and so forth.
Yeah, if you're at home, and it's great with your dog or your wife for breakfast TV or whatever people do. It is really hard to feel part. You can have the Zoom, but let's face it, most people are zoomed out. And trying to create that culture and that's how you retain people. Why does someone stay at a company even if they're getting approached? I mean, Christ, I'm a headhunter. I try and tap people up for a living. Okay, we're scorned upon. Although within the legal world, it's quite competitive as well, right? I was speaking to a few. Right now, it's really hard, especially in the law side as well, because as soon as you have someone good, they're being tapped up. And so what's the only way you can retain them? Pay them obscene amounts of money, okay? And I know lawyers don't like to do that, okay? Or banks sometimes don't want to do that. But also, it's, if they feel part of something. And it's sometimes easier to create that culture, I think, at a smaller institution than at a larger bank, but that's when it's down to an individual manager who runs a desk. It might be a pod of 10 people or 20 people to do that. But then how do you create culture if suddenly, I'm in London, I've got a guy who's in Milan, I've got 2 people in Madrid. It's impossible.
It's not impossible. That's a whole different discussion, maybe another different panel discussion as well. But, these companies are doing it, and they're evolving as well, and it's how they're sort of perceived in the market. I think actually, like in a post-COVID sort of world, people are now thinking about their next move, right? And they've had this opportunity of this work-life balance that you spoke about as well. So, people are, really beginning to understand, what is it that they want to do? What impact do they want to make in the world? We've just come out of COP26, right? So, people are looking at who they are as individuals, but what impact that they're making.
Well, I think it's very hard, particularly for new starters, when you onboard a new starter, the culture of, well, straight away you're working from home. Because there's nothing beats going out for drinks and embracing them into the team and having networking. And it's very difficult for hiring new people. But the fintechs, real believer in fintech, and you've got the health tech. But one thing I think the government needs to also address with and everyone working from home and all this Zoom and use of broadband is and we've seen it a bit with the fuel crisis, is the energy market. Where is all this electricity coming from? Data centers, people don't think about it. They switch on their Netflix, they put on their BBC iPlayer, and they don't realize that's burning more jet fuel. It's burning the equivalent of going in a plane on jet fuel, streaming. I don't know, 80% of the world's internet comes from outside Washington, D.C., in a place called Loudon, and goes under the Atlantic and comes back to your TV screen. So I think it's something that the government needs to address with all this. Fintech, it's a great thing to get out of this Brexit and COVID, and the UK is good at it, but where's the electricity coming from?
We've talked a lot about sort of the ecosystem perspective and bringing people in, getting employees, getting talent. And one thing I'd like to touch on before we take questions from the audience, so audience, think of your questions, is the other side of things, attracting clients from beyond the UK. Has Brexit in a post-COVID world affected the ways that companies are attracting clients and building businesses abroad? And Barney, I'll put this to you first.
Well, I mean, there are some legal changes, structural changes that happen, but in the scheme of things now, I mean, I've got a lot of clients coming to the UK, setting up licensed businesses in the UK, wanting to do business cross-border into the UK to tap into everything we're talking about. And that's not changed. I mean, in a way, there was a bit of a hiatus around the whole referendum where people were sort of wondering what's going on, and that seems to have ceased, or at least to be ceasing. And as I say, there are a lot of people now wanting to tap back into that and tap into the trusted system, and that's what we need to now be facilitating.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think reverse solicitation is a very grey area. There's some people still relying on that. If a client comes to you, but otherwise, you have to set up an operation within the EU. And it's very expensive. And and increasingly, the passporting seems to be almost like disappearing a bit. France is doing their own thing. Spain's doing their own thing. Each country is starting to do their own thing. So, I'm even questioning, is passporting, it might exist there in theory, but can you actually use it? Because each country now seems to be doing their own thing.
So one more question for y'all before we go to questions for the audience. And I'd like to ask you to make a prediction. So we covered a lot of ground here, many different topics regarding post-COVID, post-Brexit London. So it doesn't have to be any specific topic, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you think the trends today are heading in 2022, 2023, and beyond. So, David, you look particularly eager, so you're going to go first.
Well, I mean, as we talked about, I'm a big believer. I think fintech is a good way out of this for post-Brexit and COVID. UK has got so many unicorns. It's well established in this sector. So, and we've got a strong financial sector in the UK. So I think it's one thing we need to get behind to get us out of that. But I think another trend I think is going to be the energy crisis. What are we going to do to fund all our insatiable appetite for we're recharging everything. Everything is electricity based, and so there's going to be a lot of pressure on where are we getting the electricity from. You can see France owns a lot of UK electricity. They can switch off Jersey just like that. They own London electricity. So Russia's sort of controlling countries with energy. So energy is going to be a key thing, I think, in the future, and the pressure on the commodities markets.
Definitely. Parveen, what about you?
I was hoping you would go.
It's all right, I can make a prediction. My kids are not going to give up Netflix in 2023. Even if it's going to burn forests down or whatever, they'll never give it up. Look, I think it'd be really interesting to see it's always hard to give a prediction when you're recording it, and there's always going to be someone who digs out afterwards and goes, well, that prediction was crap.
Receipts.
I think fintechs London will continue to grow as a hub. I think it's an obvious statement. I think they'll continue to try and attract more talent from banks. At the moment, we're looking at the trend and the graph on them taking it. Now, that's not because people want to leave banks to go into necessarily fintechs. It's just because the way that banking is going ahead, desks are getting smaller rather than bigger. So there's always going to be those people that want to make that move. Look, everyone who's here in London, you just have to walk around the city right now and see how more and more buildings are being built. That is a pretty positive sign that there is, some big institutions thinking that London is going to continue to grow as a hub. So, look, I think there being a spread across other European cities is great, but London's fine.
I think there will be a recalibration of regulation. It'll become that some of the EU blanket will be lifted. We'll refocus things, but it'll be slower than it could be, and that perhaps some of us would want. That's just in the nature of things, but it's already started. It'll accelerate.
So I'm going to predict more investment into fintechs, hoping more IPOs as well, and that the UK will be leading when it comes to sort of regulation as well. And finally, just still always being in the top three in the world. So I'll leave it on that positive note.
Thank you so much.